Hi, I'm Mike McGuire. Welcome to this bonus content of the Our Star, a look at the life of Canadian professional wrestler Leo Burke radio special. Now, this was something that took me a few weeks to put together and get all the guests together for. And the interviews often went a lot longer than what you heard in the 46-minute special. So I wanted to share some of that extra audio with you and give you a little bit of a deeper look at what Leo meant to everyone I spoke with. If you'd like to hear the full special, head to mcguireshow.com/Leo-Burke, and you can play it for absolutely free anytime. More of these full-length interviews will be coming out throughout the week on the McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed. So thanks for listening, and enjoy. Joining me now, he is arguably our country's greatest historian, one of the greatest of all time when it comes to following pro wrestling's lineage. Accomplished author, publisher, reporter, journalist, you name it. Greg Oliver, thanks so much for coming on. And how you doing, pal?
It's all good. Thanks for having me on the show, Mike. I've got my Team Canada Cheerio shirt on to watch some Olympic stuff. I am a proud Canadian, but it was a shame. I'd been camping a week with my scout troop that I run and come back to the news that Leo passed. I didn't actually write up the obituary for slamwrestling.net this time because I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. But I'll do something personal coming up in the next few days because he was just such a great guy. And Leo had a unique ability to be not necessarily self-deprecating, but he certainly wasn't a braggart, but he had an excellent ability to explain things, which is, I think, why so many guys who trained under him, with him, and got in the ring with him really rave about him because he just had a bigger ability and it wasn't all about him. And in pro wrestling, that's kind of rare.
A lot of the people we've been talking to already on the show say the same thing. You didn't want to screw up in front of him because he was a bit of a perfectionist, but at the same time, you could tell he did it because he cared about the person succeeding, not just because he was being nitpicky and critical of what they were doing. When it comes to your experience with Leo, when did you first meet him?
This is a fun story. So 1999, we were out in Halifax for a destination wedding. One of my best friends who had gone to Ryerson, which is now TMU, and we studied journalism together. So he and his wife were getting married out in Halifax. And so it is a destination wedding. So you're spending the same time with everybody day after day.
Yeah.
And so then I made a decision, and my wife oddly supported me, and we went to Berwick, Nova Scotia, which is one of those tiny little places that Atlantic Grand Prix would run, and a tiny little old arena that didn't have ice in the summer, so therefore they were having their wrestling. And it really was one of those stereotypical crowds. They used to joke, right, about how the first 10 rows would have 10 teeth combined. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was definitely a small town feel, and it was so different than, living in Toronto and seeing shows on that scale. At that point, I was working with the Sun and Canoe, and the Slam Wrestling was all that. So it wasn't a big deal for me to talk my way into the back, but I got to meet the Beast. I got to meet Cuban Assassin. I got to meet Leo Burke. And Ready to Pray was 14 working that tour. So,
wow.
And Leo was one of those guys. Before I left, though, after the show, I asked him to sign a picture, which I don't usually do, right? I try not to be a fanboy, but I got
you're way better at that than I am, by the way. But yeah, go on.
Well, it's hard, because you do want to remember these memories. So I got him to sign it to my friend John and Rosa on their wedding, and because we'd already wrapped the present, whatever. And so when we got to the actual wedding, I set it, sort of just with all the gifts, and John saw it. He immediately put it right in front of all the wedding gifts because it was Leo Burke. And he was the hero of the Maritimes in many ways, especially when it comes to pro wrestling. And you have to remember that there weren't a ton of guys that came out of Atlantic Canada that played hockey. Like, this is well before Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon and all those guys became huge stars. The guys that came out of the Maritimes generally were role players. So guys in the wrestling world were a bigger deal back then than certainly they are today, just because we didn't get as much entertainment.
It was the thing. It was the thing out there. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't the only thing. It was the summer thing, right? That's also the other thing, right? It was a focus, like 3 month sort of tour where they went around and did all these different things. And if the tour was going well, Emil would often extend it a little bit into September. So it was a focus thing. Everybody could sort of set aside whatever else they were doing and enjoy the wrestling out in the East Coast. And I was talking with a couple friends the other day, and it's not that Leo was a star because his family ran the promotion, right? For so many years, it was international wrestling with Al Zank was sort of the figurehead guy and a guy making a lot of the deals behind the scenes. And then his brother Rudy K was the one who was actually the promoter. Um, so Leo was a star and got pushed, yes, because of family connections, but he wouldn't have been able to succeed if he didn't have that charisma, if he didn't have that skill, and if he didn't have that, like the je ne sais quoi, right? The thing that made him connect to all those other fans. And the proof that he could succeed would be obviously going out to Calgary during the rest of the year,
Mhm.
where he was also a star. But to most American listeners or international, it's like Leo Burke, who's that? Like he was Tommy Martin a little
Yeah.
bit in Charlotte and Kansas City, but he didn't ever become a star in the U.S. And it's a shame because he was an amazing, amazing talent.
And that's kind of why I wanted to do this special episode and have voices like you on here, just to kind of give the credibility to fans that don't know about Leo Burke. And maybe this makes you go to YouTube and check out some matches. I watched a clip of him and Brett, and this was from a Pro Wrestling Plus episode where I stole my
Ah,
logo from.
there you
And
go.
it was Leo and Brett, and they're literally working a headlock for, it was like the people say it satirically, have a 10-minute headlock and you expect the fans to go wild. This is what they were doing. It was about 5 or 6 minutes of a side headlock exchange, and basically Leo having Brett down and Brett fighting his way out of it a couple times. And every time Brett would get out of it, the place erupted because there was that much passion and that much heat from the crowd on what was going on in the ring. Like it was unreal. See, I didn't think that the 5-minute headlock was really, that big of a thing. You always kind of hear it as a blast to old time wrestling, but when you see it and it actually worked, you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But I watched another match, him and Brett again, because we're gonna have Brett on the show here, and Brett said to me, I think Leo worked as a better babyface than a heel, but he was working heel for Brett, and Brett just basically bounced him all around. All Leo did was take bumps for 10 minutes, and just after every shot, just bumping around the ring, flying around. But you could tell that the people were into it because they had that connection with Leo. They loved him as a baby face. When he turned, they got hot at him, and just the fire was there. So would you say that maybe, this term is kind of overused these days, but especially out east, that Leo was maybe kind of like the people's champion?
Yeah, no, absolutely. People's champion is a good way to put it because, again, he wasn't a bragger, right? He didn't have to go out there and be the cock of the walk kind of thing, right? He exuded that maritime charm, that friendliness, all that kind of thing. I and even if you're a villain, there's still something to it. It's a Canadian kind of villain, maybe. I don't know. Is that maybe we're too in tune to being Canadian,
Politely
but
sinister.
yeah, it's just an odd kind of way to look at it. But I think there's an element of that for sure. And then he was so well liked by all his peers. So at the Cauliflower Alley Club, when they honored him, he went a couple of years, but the one year he honored him was a really big deal because his family came down. There was all kinds of the Calgary guys that were there, and everybody just sort of gravitated to the guy. Right? He was a good storyteller. One of my favorite memories ever from pro wrestling is going out to Memron Cook, which is where all the Cormier family came from. And I mentioned Rudy already, and there was the Beast, and there was Leo, and there was also Bobby K, who was the younger brother. He was the musician of the bunch. Their brother Malcolm was a referee. All these kind of things. But so they had a big reunion. I'm just looking up the year here in front of
Yeah,
me.
that's fine.
Oh, there it was, 2006. And so we went up to Memron Cook, and it was like a privilege to get invited. So that it's a tiny little town. I don't know, maybe 45 minutes from. I think I flew into Fredericton, and the whole community came together to finally celebrate all these brothers who had meant so much to the community and the entire family. And it was a big, just down east kind of party. There was fiddle music, there was drinking, there was just a good time. And as much fun as that was, the next day it was like Bob Leonard and I and a couple of the people went out to one of the Cormier homes where we just sat out there. Uber Galon was there, drank beer. They played music, just played, pull out their guitar or whatever, and we just sat around and talked. And that was magical to me. And that's, again, that's a bigger thing than just the wrestling, right? We
Yeah.
see the personas that they put on the screen, the bigger than life characters that we want them to be. But I love, I don't really go to the matches very often, or go to YouTube like you've seen that you were just talking about, to go watch these things. I go
Mhm.
back to the memories I have of these people outside of the ring and how they treated me. And Leo could not only explain everything really great, but he had a great memory. He was great at telling stories, and he remembered me too, and had a lot of respect for what I was doing. And that in the end of the day, all we have is our word, and our what kind of respect we got out of life. And Leo had both.
You know what? Truer words can be spoken. You know, I've had these conversations off microphone about things like that. But let's talk about the Leo Cormier, Leo Burke that you did get to see behind the scenes when he wasn't just everybody's favorite or everybody's favorite villain. How would you describe the Leo that you got to know a little bit after wrestling?
Gimpy, is that a good word? I don't know. He'd gotten beaten up, right?
Yeah.
And he'd lost his hair, so he didn't have that crazy curly hair that we often associate with Leo Burke. All those kind of things. And so yeah, he had a number of knee surgeries, all those kind of things, which brought him down to a bit more human level, I guess. So he wasn't quite, and he was never superhuman, right? You look at his physique and everything; he was in great shape. And he could go those 60-minute matches or whatever it was, but he was never your dominating muscle bound dude. But
Hmm.
yeah, so he definitely got beaten up over the years, and paid the price,
Yeah.
for the, sacrificed for the good of the fans. So from that aspect, yeah, Gimpy came to mind. But other than that, yeah, he was the quiet guy. He was a good listener. So he just liked telling stories, and didn't need to be the focus of that conversation with the buddies at the CAC, which is really where I saw him. And then Memron Cook was about the whole family, right? And he was definitely, that was a big deal to have everybody involved.
Now, we've already gone into a bit how you use the term he was our star. He was Canada's star, Eastern Canada especially. But again, his effect out here in Alberta, other places that he went to, wherever he was, he made an impact. But he didn't really spread his wings internationally all that much. But he has had an impact on so many stars that have gone on to do great things. I mean, we've talked at length now about that WWF class, especially that, you have the guys like Edge, Christian Test, Mark Henry, Ken Shamrock, and those that came through with Brett's camp. But for anybody that hasn't seen Leo Burke, if you were to describe him as a wrestler, maybe even comparative to references we would know today, or can you compare him to anybody like today? How would you describe Leo Burke, the wrestler, to a first time fan?
He's got a little bit of that, the FTR kind of thing, right? Like without all the high flying,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, that sort of the body shape, that respect for the past, the present, and the future, right? And FTR are guys like that, right? They love, celebrating the guys from the past. They obviously know they're the future, but so those kind of guys, whereas you get so many of these guys that just have egos, that have no respect for the past,
Mhm.
right? And don't know their history. So yeah, those are the two guys that spring to mind when we talk like that. But yeah, like wrestling wise, he was mainly a singles guy, right? We don't really think of him as a tag team. Obviously, there were moments there, but he was North American champion a bunch of times, and that belt out in the Maritimes, whether it was international or Emile Dupre's Atlantic Grand Prix. He did some stuff down in Puerto Rico. Held some of the lesser titles. I don't think he was the top champion there. But he got around a little bit. He made a career out of pro wrestling, and then settled in Calgary and raised a family a little bit. I don't know how involved he was. That's another whole thing, right? The whole wrestling family thing is
Yeah.
hard on everybody. But I could see the love his kids had for him when they were down at the College Rally Club, and the love his peers had for him.
Well, you know what, Greg, I appreciate your perspective, your reminiscing here of Leo Burke as we talk about his life and times. And again, just one of those names that maybe fans today don't know about at all in some cases. I mean, let's face it, you and I are getting a little more gray here and there. And it's one of those things where you get to know stories that you're telling to other people for the first time that you may have told 100 times overall. But I guess if you had one crystal clear memory, and you've already shared so many great ones, but if you had another kind of fun or interesting story about Leo Burke, what would you tell us?
It would probably just be how humble he was. And like I said, meeting him and interviewing him for the first time in '99 in this tiny little arena in Berwick, Nova Scotia.
Hmm.
He had no airs about him, right? He was just a dude. This was his job. He liked being in the dressing room. He liked still getting the attention, right? He's older at this point. It's a Legends kind of tour. He still wanted to get out there and see his fans, see his friends, and mentor them. And that's the Leo Burke I'll definitely remember. He's in our Heroes and Icons book, the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame Heroes and Icons, as one of those examples of somebody who may not be known to everybody in the world, but had a great sort of local hero feel to him.
Greg Oliver, you can check out his work, slamwrestling.net. Dozens upon dozens of books have been published. You're working on some new stuff as well, which we look forward to seeing come out. And always great just catching up with you, Greg. Really appreciate the time here. Thank you for sharing your stories on Leo Burke.
Thank you for having me on the show.